Do you categorize what Hamas has been doing, particularly on October the 7th, what Hezbollah did within hours of October the 7th and carried on for the next year, what the Houthis have done, a lot of it orchestrated by, doubtless, the Iranian regime. Do you categorize that as resistance, as freedom fighting, or are there elements of all those groups who are genuinely terrorist in their thinking?
Well, someone's a terrorist is other one's.
Yeah, but how you categorize it?
How I categorize it? I mean, like, I'm an American citizen. Of course, I don't want to come back and find the FBI raiding my house. So, yes, of course.
Come on now.
Did you believe that?
Dude, that happens all the time to me. Come on, Bassem. Get your feet wet, bro. Jump in. The water's warm, okay?
Well, at the advice of my lawyer, I would say.
Well, I don't think you'd be banned from going back to America.
You know what happened to Scott Ritter? He was the former UN inspector of nuclear weapons in Iraq.
He's a convicted pedophile.
Yeah, but like when he was raided a few months ago, it was because he was talking against Israel. Asa Winstanley, he was a British journalist in London, and his house was raided just last week because he talked about Israel. And this is actually, Piers, what I like about you is that you are a fierce warrior against cancel culture. Right?
Yeah.
If you cancel people for their opinion, we're not living in a free world anymore, right?
I totally agree.
So, for example, you have Robert Saleh, who was the coach of the NFL Jets. He wore like a small Lebanese flag, and he was canceled. I mean, I don't know. It's interesting. I came to America, and I was so happy that I can speak about anyone I want, and then suddenly it's like, oh, we can do whatever you want. Unless if it's like...
It is, I mean, it's tangible to me when I go to America, far more than it is in the UK, for example. The support for Israel is pretty rock solid in terms of their political class, in terms of much of the media, if not all of the media. It's more tangible in America than it is in most other countries.
Yeah.
Including here.
Yeah.
A lot more criticism of Israel here than there is in America.
Yeah, and yet you have Israel having a crazy control on the political apparatus, whether in America or in here. I mean, 13 out of 25 of the labor cabinet here are funded by Israeli lobbies. 126 out of 355 MPs are funded by Israel. I mean, out of those 13 members of cabinet is the prime minister himself, his counselor, his deputy, the home secretary, the foreign secretary, and the secretary of the treasury, who oversees the arms shipments to Israel. So I don't understand why. I mean, I think we should talk about that more about anything, because that is actually what gives Israel the cover for what they're doing.
My take on Israel's government is that Netanyahu, to get back into power, aligned himself with some very hard right-wing people who've spoken in a very genocidal language about what they really want to do with Gaza and Palestinian people, and that he should go and they should go, and there should be new leadership in Israel, but that there should also be no place in power or government going forward for a group like Hamas after what they did on October the 7th. Would you agree with that?
Well, I'm not a Palestinian, so I cannot really...
What's your view?
Well, what's my view? Oh, yeah, I understand the view of... Well, there's two things about it. First of all, when you say that Netanyahu and Smotrich and Ben Gvir should go, it's as if as the rest of the Israeli political scene is peaceful. As a matter of fact, more than 90% of Israelis in a poll said that they should do more in Gaza. Over 70% of Israelis said that they should actually stop the aid, the humanitarian aid in Gaza. But let's talk about how... Yeah, I understand the thing. Like, if you gave them a state, it would be rewarding terrorists, right? And we understand, like, I mean, I have to be fair. I know that a lot of Arabs will hate me for saying this, but terrorism has been actually going in the Middle East for a very long time. I mean, do you remember the bombing of the King David Hotel? 92 British soldiers were killed.
That was Israel, bitch.
Bombing of the Cairo Haifa train, over 200 soldiers, British soldiers killed. The assassination of Volker Bernadotte or Lord Moyen, all done by Israeli Zionist militias. They were the terrorists, and they were rewarded of having their own state. So I don't understand the double standard. As a matter of fact, one of the people who were in these terrorist attacks was Isaac Shamir, and he was on a terrorist list, English terrorist list, and he couldn't come to London until he became a prime minister. But to be fair,
yeah, in Israel they elect their terrorists to be the leaders of their country. Literally, I shit you not. Okay, Moshe Dayan, Yitzhak Shamir. Ariel Sharon, Menachem Begin. Okay, he was prime minister. David Ben-Gurion, obviously a terrorist, was the founder of Israel. I could go on and on and on, but the Haganah and the Irgun specifically were paramilitary terrorist Israeli groups. They actually predated Israel, the formation of Israel, but all these people that were part of those paramilitary terrorist organizations and even were the leaders of them went on after the creation of the State of Israel to become the leaders of that state and populated different ranks and positions within the Israeli government. What's my least favorite Knesset party? I mean, is that a real question? I reject the question entirely, okay? I can't even name one, okay? The Likud. There, you happy? I hate the whole thing equally. How about that?
The Israeli government at the time, 1949, have actually declared the Stern gang as a terrorist group, and they arrested two of them. And they gave them very, 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 very severe sentences, 8 and 5 years, and then they were released after a month.
Do you see any blame on your side for any of this going back to 1948?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Genuinely, I mean, I'm not after a.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's like saying, can you condemn the Jews in the Holocaust? Do you condemn? Did the slaves do anything wrong? You know, we have one indigenous people living in peace in their country, in their national territory, and they are being invaded by settlers who violently overthrow them and expel them and slaughter them if they don't leave. How can you say whatever, and oh, by the way, the invading settler army has a monopoly on the violence, is backed by the largest superpower at the time, the British Empire. How would you like them to resist, Piers? In what way should they resist, when somebody shows up when the Nazis show up at your house, what should you do? What would be your response? And should we judge you for, defending your home? I mean, you're trying to both sides this thing, and it's not like we're talking about, Japan versus the United States. We're not talking about Germany versus the United States or any, even-handed, powerful countries. We're talking about one of the, the strongest military and the strongest country in the Middle East going up against a concentration camp full of kids. That's the power dynamic. How you're going to hold these kids, you're going to pass judgment on them? Do you pass judgment? Yeah, right. I mean, just all you got to do is I think you just flip the social group in question. Well, it'd be like saying, Piers, do you condemn the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto? Do you condemn the slaves in 1831 for their rebellion? Do you condemn any oppressed people for resisting violently their occupying terrorizers? Do you condemn? I mean, this might work on him, even though I think there's some problems with it on my end. But I think this sort of analogy would work on Piers. Is, do you condemn George Washington for taking up arms against the British? Are you that un-American? I mean, I know he's English, but he's part of the Anglosphere, the United States Western Anglosphere. So he's paid by Americans. So it only makes sense that he would, side with, the American patriots here. Of course you don't condemn the American patriots for resisting British rule. I think he would like to be American. Nat Turner was just a bad guy who wanted to do bad things. Yeah. And that's the other thing, is he's assuming that, again, I mean, these are the finer points to tell Piers Morgan and to tell his large audience, is the violence of the oppressed is qualitatively different than the violence of the oppressor. They're done for different reasons. They're done for different motivations, different moralities. And one is a protected human right, that being violence of the oppressed, and the other is an egregious war crime against humanity, and that would be the violence of the oppressor. And international law seems to take a sober look at this, and it's something that seems to escape you. Israel doesn't have the right to defend itself, right? It doesn't have the right. No country can say they have the right to defend themselves in occupied territory, which is what is, you don't, when things are concerning and two countries in conflict with each other, like, you consult international law, you consult the Geneva Conventions, you consult, when we're talking about occupied people, when we're talking about occupation, military occupation, you consult the International Committee for the Red Cross, which administers the Geneva Conventions and the laws of belligerent occupation. There's a whole, we should ask the legal experts. What do the legal experts say, Piers? Oh, they side with Palestine. They condemn Israel because Israel is the illegal occupier. That's the only thing that you need to understand about this conflict, is that that's the overarching framework. It's an illegal occupation, and it's a very simple thing to understand. There are many complex geopolitical events in the world, and this isn't one of them. You cannot derive a moral right from an illegal act. Let me say that again. You cannot derive a moral right from an illegal act. That's what I would say.
A satirical response. Genuinely, when you look back at the history of this conflict, one of the most powerful pieces I've read actually about all this, one that I just thought was very interesting, was a Jewish journalist called Jonathan Freeland at The Guardian. And he wrote a column where he said he could make a very powerful argument, both for Israel and for the Palestinians, in which he could present a case that they were the more overriding victim of this whole conflict.
I'm aware of Jonathan Freeland.
What's your view of him?
Well, everybody knows he's a liberal Zionist. He's one of the most outspoken people in defending Israel. But
he wasn't. But my point was, he said that he could construct a case for Palestinians to have a genuine right to feel aggrieved.
You know what else?
Can you do the same the other way?
You know what else he said? He said, Israel has a very difficult choice of if they continue doing it in Gaza or not doing it in Gaza. All we can do is just acknowledge it and see it. And this is very privileged because he can do it because he's on the stronger side. And this is the thing. It's like, we acknowledge it, we see it, it's so bad, we're killing civilians. But what we can do, and then we raise our hands at the end and say it's too bad, it's inevitable. War is so bad, it's bad. But to your point, yeah, I think the Palestinians had done a grave mistake for not accepting the settlement that they were given by the UN partition. They were given 47% of their land, and let's go back.
That's right. The settling minority was given the majority of the land, and the indigenous majority was given the minority of the land. Why does it seem so lost on people, and not you fine people, of course, but on a lot of people, that the indigenous Arabs should have rejected that? Why does that seem so unthinkable that the indigenous majority would have rejected something that was mandated to them, that they should lose the majority of their land to a minority population? And that's, that's the heart of what lies. That is what lies at the heart of this whole thing. The Zionist settlers are the minority. They are outnumbered. So if they lived in a democracy like they claim, they would be voted out of office. Their land would be voted away. They would not have the power that they have. So what do they need to do? Well, they need to institute an apartheid state where you take away the rights of certain groups within the territory so that you can claim and maintain and sustain your
the Balfour Declaration
majority rule, or your power, even though you're
at the time there were 60,000 Jewish people.
What is going on? I didn't press that. Hey, Conquer, thank you so much for the 5 gifted. You guys are so kind to me. Appreciate that. Conquer always gives, and Conquer is a modulator for the stream, and that's really nice of them. And if only more of you gave, okay, maybe I'd be nicer of a person. But sadly, we're not in that world, are we, Craven Dark Shadow? I know he wants to talk so bad. Well, this is my stream, okay? I can be a pause champ if I want. You bring on the spanking. That sounds kind of naughty, but either way, yeah. Why does it seem so unthinkable that the 1948 partition plan would be rejected by the indigenous Arabs who formed the majority, and yet were not consulted? Okay, they were never factored in. They were never asked. They said, this is what we're doing, typical colonial mindset, logic, behavior. We're just going to come in and say, this is going to be the land now. Fuck off. You're going to go here now. And, once you plant that seed of colonialism, I mean, that's an invasive species, that spreads. You can't just, we're just going to take a little bit. Like, even the Israelis, as fake as they are, they understood that, they were unhappy that they were only given 53% or whatever it was. Even though they were given the majority, they were still not satisfied. And you have remarks from David Ben-Gurion saying at the time that this was not to be accepted. Obviously, we've got our fingers in the blackbird pie, but we're going to have to continue spreading as the years go on. And that's exactly what they've done. They've always understood that that's what they were supposed to do. So, the crime of the partition plan and the crime of settler colonialism was already just by nature. That was just from its implementation. That was a crime of aggression, outlined just 3 years earlier in the Geneva Conventions. The crime of aggression was the supreme international crime, where you transfer, indigenous people from their land. If you transfer them out or exile, that's ethnic cleansing, motherfucker. That's a crime of aggression. You can't forcibly expel people from their land. And it's crazy to me that the UN speaks out of both sides of its mouth when, in 1945, the Geneva Conventions rule that the crime of aggression would be to do these reprehensible things, and then 3 years later they say, we're going to rubber stamp it and say, yes, this is, they formalized it. It was legally acceptable, but even though they've, at the same time they've released the UN Charter, they've forged the UN Charter where it decries these very actions. But that's because justice has a double standard. It's a two-tier system. There are sets of worthy victims and sets of unworthy victims. F those Z's. Speaking of which, I keep thinking of posting Nuremberg. There were so many journalists and media figures that were prosecuted for lying about genocide. Something to think about America. Yeah, you should. Night Screech, you have Conquer the Concubine to thank, who apparently brings the motherfucking pain. I had no idea, and now I'm scared. But yes, you should thank them, or else.
Living in a 700,000 population, which makes them 8%. That number jumped from 8% to 30% after the Second World War and the Holocaust. Now, imagine yourself being a Palestinian, you're having all of these refugees.
Yeah, you're doing a Hitler.
Coming to you, and then they're forming gangs and stealing your land and killing you. And then the UN said, I know what we can do. I'm going to give the people who just arrived 30 years ago.
Yeah, it just means that, exactly, Amazigh, it just means that Jews don't have a supremacy. It doesn't matter if you're Jewish, Muslim, Christian. Imagine that. All people treated equally. And there's no we're chosen and you're not, so we can do this and you can't. It's just one state. It's called Palestine. You can get over your little liberal Nazi fantasy, your Nazi wet dream of your racist utopia. And yeah, really, it's so sad. I love when they try to make it out as so complex. It's literally you just dissolve the apartheid. But, buddy, we've done it before. By God, we'll fucking do it again. Literally just stop being racist assholes. So sorry you have to, you can't exploit people. The only thing that's illegal. And Paul's baked, so that's cool. Thank you for telling us how baked you are, Paul. We appreciate that. Honesty is really something that we cherish here on stream. Herzl Stan is the most anti-Jewish institution in the world. That's correct. And I like how you said anti-Jewish and not anti-Semitic. I like how you said anti-Jewish and not anti-diab. Where you at, Ravens say? All right, let's continue.
53 of the land, and I'm going to give the people who are already there, who form 70%, 47%.
But there are also, so I would say to you, there are also hundreds of thousands of Jewish people who were displaced from their homes in Arab countries. So was that wrong?
Well,
what are we talking about here, Piers? Hundreds of thousands of Jewish people that were displaced where? When? What does that have to do with England and the British government formulating the state of Israel by decree and forcibly driving 1.3 million people out of, or maybe it was more than that, but what does that have to do with other crimes? Why are you giving us a whataboutism right now?
I advise that you read Avi Shloim, who is a Jewish Iraqi, and I think he's also British.
That's a faux pas. I would never say, read this person. I think it's a bad rhetorical device to do is, let me throw out another person that you should read. Read this book. No, just tell me the answer.
That's not the timeline. The timeline was...
It is true, then.
Yeah, but that's not the timeline. The timeline is important. The timeline was the Zionist gangs, they were killed, they raped, they stole land, and then they basically evicted the people out of their land. And overnight, 750,000 Palestinians was displaced. Overnight. Over the few years, of course, now Israel is now the enemy. And there was a lot of rise of nationalism and yes, in some countries that happened. But
was that wrong? Is my point.
Of course, but it is not the whole thing.
What I'm trying to do, and I'm not trying to trap you or trick you.
No.
I'm just trying to get you to concede that in a period since 1948, there have been things on both sides. I'm not trying to equivocate either. I'm just trying to get you to. I understand completely everything you've said and are going to say about Israel, and you're very implacable about that, and you have every right to be. So I get that. But can you find criticism of your own side in this argument, going back to 48, proper criticism, where things have been done differently, perhaps we wouldn't be where we are?
Okay, so if you are British and you had 1 million Ukrainians arriving to your home, and then over 30 years, that number increased to 30% of the population, and then the UN gave you less than half of your country, wouldn't you fight? Wouldn't you resist? But now it's our
That wasn't my question.
What was your question?
Whether you can find anything to criticize since 1948.
Give me something to criticize.
No,
there's a lot to criticize.
You know the history better than anyone.
There is a lot to criticize. Of course, there's a lot of mistakes. I mean, the Middle East has been plagued by a lot of the military dictatorship, of course. I mean, but having mistakes we should not be penalized by having our land taken away from us just because the other side is stronger, right? Because what are you telling your kids? If you're strong and you have enough arms and weapons, you can take whatever land you want. That's not why the UN was formed. That's not why the Security Council was formed.
When you heard that Sinwar, the Hamas leader, had been killed, what were your feelings about that?
Well, when I heard he was killed, of course, this is something that was actually, I said, oh, wow, that's actually, he survived all of that. But I think it was a huge mistake by the Israelis to release the footage, because now he's an icon, right?
Is he?
Well, again, someone's terrorist is someone else's hero, right?
Right, but all he did was lob a piece of wood at them. That was it.
Yeah, he was also he was lost an arm and he was there, and it took them 3 tanks to bring down the house. I mean, hey, you can respect your enemy.
But when you saw the footage, for example, of Sinwar in one of the tunnels he'd helped create, spending the billions that had been given to Hamas.
Billions?
Well, they were given billions of dollars. And I would say Netanyahu was quite happy to do that because he wanted to create a split between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. So I'm not...
So why are we blaming Hamas? Why are you not blaming Hamas?
No, I'm just saying that Hamas had an option of how to spend that money.
Yeah,
they were the government in power, and they chose predominantly to spend it on a tunnel system and arming themselves. When you see Sinwar walking through that tunnel safely with his wife and his kids and so on, and there's a load of money next to him.
A load of money?
There was a huge pile of cash next to where he was supposedly sleeping. When you see that, do you not think that he betrayed his own people?
No.
That they weren't able to use these tunnels, the Palestinians. He knew when he activated October the 7th and ordered it, what the reaction was likely to be. He was sentencing to death immediately thousands of his own people, none of whom were allowed, apart from the Hamas elements, to use the tunnel system. I mean, is that not a sickening betrayal of his people?
Well, let's talk about the billions of dollars that was actually used. I remember a report by Ben Shapiro, and he brought videos of Hamas digging up tubes, water pipes, and then and they're using them as weapons. And they said these are the money that was given to them by the EU, and they squandered. They took the money. But the thing is, what Ben Shapiro didn't say that he stole that report from Al Jazeera. He removed the narration, and what the narration was said that this was actually pipes that was installed by the Israelis in order to steal the money from Gaza.
Okay, but
so there's a lot of lying in the thing.
I don't dispute there's lying, but what you can't dispute, Bassem, is that clearly since 2005, Hamas has spent a fortune of money they could have spent differently with their people. They spent it on this sophisticated and extensive tunnel system.
The tunnel system that is bigger than the New York subway system?
It would appear so.
450 miles?
I don't know. Do you know how big it is?
450. I mean, nobody. I think if there's 450 miles underneath the tunnel, we have seen droves and droves of tunnels. What we have seen is small rooms, very, very.
So you don't believe that there is?
No, I don't. No, I don't believe. Of course, there are tunnels, but.
I mean, now he's talking about tunnels. It's just I would slap this dude so hard, Piers. I would clap back so hard about the tunnels. Okay. I still feel like Bassem isn't going far enough. He's still like, oh yes, there are tunnels. I'd be like, yeah, bitch, there are tunnels. Yeah, of course there are tunnels. How else are they going to get their clothes and their food? And like, why did they build the tunnels? I mean, that's the real appropriate answer. And, I'm thankful to have read, not all, but honestly, even just the fucking foreword to this book called The Gaza Strip, The Political Economy of De-Development. I know I'm doing what I don't like, which is say, you should read this author. But, if I was in a debate with Piers Morgan, I wouldn't necessarily tell you what what my sources were, but she goes over the rise of the tunnel economy. I've read it on stream many times, and just why they have tunnels, and how the tunnels increased after the mowings of the lawn. Like, how do 99% of their economy was smuggled in from tunnels. 99% of all the materials that they received to rebuild their civilization after the last murderous bombing campaign. It was all coming from tunnels. This is what happens when you place 2.3 million people under an illegal blockade. It's all condemned by the international community and all of the relevant institutions. Like, this is not up for debate, Piers Morgan. They need more tunnels. Yeah, let's build more. I mean, so they could. Have you seen the apartheid wall that goes around this strip of land? What do you expect them to do? You just die peacefully? Just starve to death? Not try to figure out some way around literally fucking around the wall, or whether they have to hang glide over the wall or burrow a tunnel underneath the wall so they can get the things that they need so they can live? Like, you fucking savagely barbaric coward of a prick. To even suggest that, like, but they're building tunnels. Well, why, if we want to talk about tunnels, why is their prime minister hiding in a tunnel right now? Is he also Hamas? Should we change his name to Hamas Yahoo?
Oh, hi there. In the past 6 months, I've been banned on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Threads, TikTok, and now YouTube. This is 1000% because of my coverage of Israel's genocide against the Palestinians. In light of being demonetized on all these platforms, I've decided to start exclusively posting to Patreon, where you can sign up for all my posts and live streams for just $3 a month.
Wow!
In addition to having all access to my live streams, you'll also be in a group chat with yours truly.
Wow, that sounds awesome.
I've spent a considerable amount of time and effort trying to build audiences on these platforms, only to have them swept away at a moment's notice, and that is pretty frustrating. But I want to say that I'm thankful and grateful for all of your support and kind words throughout all of this, and I hope to see you on these new platforms very soon.